Hi, everyone. I just wanted to record a quick message and welcome you to this workshop. I'm really excited to teach these sessions this winter into the spring. And, I hope that you'll enjoy the virtual learning journey with us. I just wanted to, record a quick message to introduce myself to you virtually since I won't be able to see you in person. And, you don't really get to see, either myself or Dr. Khayambashi much in the workshop modules. So I just wanted to connect and introduce myself. So I'm a quantitative sociologist by training and also work in the area of social psychology. And I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow and sessional professor at McMaster University, where I work on a number of mental health related projects. And, I'm currently also teaching an advanced statistics course for quantitative research methods and data analysis in the social sciences to fourth year undergraduate students, and I really enjoy that. And in terms of research, though, one of my most more recent projects, I should say, is includes doing some survey data collection in collaboration with the Canadian Mental Health Association of Hamilton. And in that project, the focus is on investigating the health consequences of emotion management and emotional labor more broadly for frontline care staff in the mental health and addiction sector. So very similar topics to what we're discussing in this workshop series. And in addition to that, I'm also a projects coordinator for a number of different mental health related projects at McMaster, which, I won't get into too much details here because of time and I don't want to bore you. But, as you can probably, gather by now, I specialize in the area of work, stress, and health, including mental health, specifically in relation to the management of emotions as an occupational requirement and its psychosocial consequences, including mental health for workers. And I've been working with, the ABMF charity since its inception. I do most of the program planning around workshops and other educated related programs. So, I'm so happy that I'm here and able to share my knowledge in this area with you all because this particular workshop is most related to my area of expertise and research. And so, so I'm so happy to share some of my research on emotional labor and its potential consequences and talk about what that might mean. And I'm also very happy to be, leading this workshop with Dr. Khayambashi, who, I currently work really closely with. And so, I hope that you guys, really enjoy the workshop, that, you at the very least find it helpful or interesting. And I'm quite excited to get into all three of the sessions and have that opportunity to then chat with you in the Q&A session at the end of the workshop. So take care, everyone. Stay safe, and we will see you soon.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Shirin Khayambashi, and I'm collaborating with Dr. Diana Singh to bring you this workshop series on the challenges of emotional labor-intensive occupations. To highlight some of my credentials, I received my PhD in sociology from McMaster University in 2019, and my research mainly focused on race and ethnic identity, religious identity, identity development, and obviously social psychology. And I believe my background in social psychology has really helped me to kind of have a better understanding uh, about the emotional and mental burden of a stressful work environment. Dr. Singh and I collaborated on this workshop series, and we prepared them in relation kind of to our ongoing research, where we explore the emotional and psychological challenges of frontline workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we believe this workshop series will help you identify work-related stresses, especially during the COVID-19 pandemics, where many of our boundaries are being pushed or slowly vanishing because of the changing of the work-home relationship. So we hope our findings help you understand how to manage work-related stresses through emotion works and better communication. Looking forward to seeing you all. Take care.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this workshop series on emotions at work. My name is Dr. Diana Singh, and over the next few workshop sessions, myself and Dr. Khayambashi will be discussing the concept of emotional labor and work stress with you. And so this is my primary area of research, as I explained in my brief bio to you all. So if you're not familiar with emotional labor, or if you haven't heard the concept before, not to worry. This first workshop is primarily dedicated to introducing you to this concept, as well as some perspectives on how it's defined, how it has been studied in research over the past few decades, and what we know about the different aspects of this type of work activity. So if you haven't gathered by now, we are primarily talking about interactive service work here. So how emotions are embedded within these types of occupations, which when we think of service work, we're talking about a broad range of occupations, from customer service, such as a grocery store clerk, to a pharmacist, and extending out to occupations in care work as well. So nurses, doctors, or mental health and addictions workers. The list is quite long. So what all of these occupations, though, have in common is that they all require some degree of emotion management and regulation. And so, as the workshop description suggests, we're going to start by discussing what is emotional labor, and then later get into what isn't emotional labor to really clearly define this concept for you. We're then going to discuss how we might know when and if we're engaging in emotional labor. And I will use examples of some occupations to demonstrate that. And then in the next workshop session, we're going to move on to discuss the potential health consequences of this type of work over an extended period of time. And finally, in the last session, we're going to talk about some practical strategies or tools that we can use to help navigate these requirements at work. Okay, so let's get right into it. When we think about emotions at work, I think the easiest example that is relatable to most people is primarily related to the saying, which I'm sure you've heard at some point, whether you either work in service yourself or even as a customer, this idea of service with a smile, right? So this is that typical and most common idea of the ideal customer service experience. When I think about this, it takes me personally back to my days as a graduate student, where I was working towards my doctorate degree, and I worked in retail. And the expectation is that in retail, you exceed the customer's expectation. So in order to deliver good service, and that can mean, greeting someone with a great big smile as soon as they walk into the storefront, or, going the extra mile when chatting with the customer, which entails not only showing these behavior cues and facial expressions that you care about the customer's needs, but also making them feel that you care. So it's not just about how you display those emotions, but it's about how you make the other person receive you or feel that you care in a way. So if you're not, what becomes problematic is, well, what if you're not having such a great day? How do you express and convince another person that you feel something you don't? And so I'll leave it at that with regards to that comment, and we'll take that up again, as I said, in the second session. But right now we're primarily focused on defining this type of labor. So let's come back to it in the next few slides. So with that example that I just gave you in mind, I also say that this is only one example, right, of how our personal emotions might intersect with our work role. What this workshop focuses on are the experiences of service workers, where the management of emotions is part of the requirements of the job. And this extends to more than just retail. We see this amongst police officers or social workers and nurses, for example. So when we think about it, in addition to really giving time, skill, and reliability to a job, so those are those traditional, well-known features of a job. Beyond that, many workers also have to give their emotions, because emotional labor is a requirement that transforms feelings and emotions into a commodity that can be bought and sold. So you're paid for a wage, for example, to deliver good customer service. And so that coordination of your state of mind internally and feeling that is necessary in order to achieve this can be a real challenge for many workers, in the sense that it tests one's capacity to really deal with people as opposed to being, dealing with things. And so before I move on and actually define emotional labor as it is, traditionally define, I want to emphasize that not all occupations require the same degree of work with emotions. So just like physical labor and mental labor, some emotions require more emotion work and emotional labor than others. But where do these ideas around emotions and expectations come from? Well, in order to understand that, we first have to take a step back and review where this comes from, and really the kind of social theories that surround emotions. So on the current slide, you're going to see some images that graphically show you the types of normative expectations that are seen around service work environments. So we see, for example, the expectation for friendly service, the willingness to help and be reliable. And then we see the normative expectations around nursing home care in the middle, right? So where we see keywords like loving, caring, or caregivers. And in the other image, we see clear instructions. So the last image on the right, we see clear instructions on how to deliver good service. So be helpful, listen, address complaints. In each of these contexts, all of these expectations can be thought of as requiring emotional effort in order to deliver them effectively. So they are what we call feeling rules, or organizationally defined feeling rules. And they're either formal or informal rules about how we should feel and display that feeling to others in different social contexts. In these examples, we see these as a requirement, or in other words, rules for these types of jobs. So in the first example, where we see the word friendly with a smile on top, this smile, as we see it in this context, is a required part of this customer service job. And the smile itself from the employee may have little to actually, nothing to do with how the individual is feeling, but it is a part of their job. And so they are essentially managing their emotions in exchange for pay. So let's take a step back now to the question I posed earlier about where do these expectations about emotions and emotional display come from? So here I briefly spoke of a social theory of emotions. Well, in order to understand this, we have to visit the field of sociology and talk about the sociologist who originally coined these concepts and ideas we're talking about with regards to emotion work. So, as all social beings, we have these unwritten, sometimes written, but mostly informal social norms about emotions or conventions about feelings in situations. So they're essentially called social rules, right? And so in her publication in 1979, the sociologist Arlie Hochschild first began a conversation about the need to manage our emotions in order to feel and also display the correct emotions that are appropriate to a situation. So Hochschild starts this piece off by first asking, why are emotions and our experiences of emotions as adults in daily life so orderly? So for example, why do people feel and express joy at parties like birthday parties or weddings? Why is that the expectation? And why is that the custom? Why are there emotional customs and rules also about sadness and expressing that sadness and grief at, for example, funerals? Every culture has its own variation, of course, but there are norms or expectations around emotional expression throughout these experiences. As a more formal definition, these are rules that govern how we try to feel or not to feel that are appropriate for the situation. And so we're going to expand on this more in the next few slides. So let's talk about feeling rules. Also, referred to display rules, but I like the term feeling rules, so let's stick to that for the purposes of this workshop. So in everyday conversation, we often talk about feelings, right? And, for example, let's say you get into an argument with a romantic partner and you're explaining the fight to your best friend or a family member. Something you might say is, well, I have the right to be angry with so-and-so because this or that happened, or this happened in the past, and that gives me the right to be reacting in this way. We speak about it in the sense of being something you have a right to. Or perhaps this might be an instance where you open up to a friend or whoever it may be that you feel guilty about something that happened. And the response is that, you shouldn't feel guilty, that things are out of your control, or whatever the case may be. These statements we make to one another are based on these rules that we have about feelings that have two features. So the first is how we should feel in a situation and what we should expect to feel. So let's use the example of gift exchange. So let's say your aunt or grandma or whoever it may be gives you a gift. And I'm going to use the example of the ugly Christmas sweater. And so this was an example that was used by another emotional labor researcher named Alicia Grandy in the States. And in her interview, she explained, so before the ugly sweater was, this thing to be celebrated at parties, it was a party theme. Essentially, there are rules about, it provides the example of rules associated with gift giving, right? And the expectations around pleasantry. So let's get back to the ugly sweater. So before it was a party theme, it was celebrated, it was a dreaded gift, right? And so let's say you have, you're at your Christmas party or whatever the case may be. And I recognize that I'm using this as an example, but that not everyone celebrates Christmas, but I am using it as an example and can be extended to, gift giving in general, right? So let's say, someone is about to give you a gift and you have a pretty good hunch that when you receive this gift, it's not going to be something that you like. It's something that you're going to hate based on maybe experiences with gifts from this person in the past or whatever the case may be. And you expect that feeling to occur inside of you when you open it. You expect that that's how you're going to feel. But at the same time, you also know that you should be happy and you should be smiling. And you should be grateful also for what the person has put the time and effort into giving you. But in this case, you open the gift and you hate it. And it's this ugly sweater and you want to feel what you should be feeling, which is happy and excited because how much effort this person put into giving you this gift. And this is what you're also expected to feel in this situation. Well, what happens? In most cases, you fake this big old smile and hope that it's convincing. And this is an example, and essentially in essence, of how we manage our emotions in accordance to the social rules and expectations around us. Now, this leads to the main topic of our workshop, which is emotional labor. And so emotional labor was first coined as a term by the same sociologist I spoke about earlier, and that is Arlie Hochschild. In 1983, she published a book entitled The Managed Heart, where she conducted some field research on flight attendants and bill collectors. If you're not already familiar with this concept, or if you haven't ever heard it before, if you Google it, you will see many, many different news articles and opinion pieces published online about it. But what Hochschild documented was that flight attendants were expected to be nicer than what's natural. And she noticed that in her field research. They're expected to make people feel at home on a plane, feel safe, feel protected, and smile, smile, and smile some more. What this meant, however, is that flight attendants, who were primarily female at the time, needed to manage their own emotions internally in terms of what they were feeling in order to display that overly friendliness and care that their job required them to display to passengers on the plane. So not only were they expected to display this, they were also expected to evoke this feeling in the passenger of feeling safe and cared for. The display rules of their job required them to internally manage their emotions in order to perform their work role. This is what is called emotional labor. It's the requirement of your job to manage your emotions effectively in exchange for a wage. Now, I'm sure you can imagine why this might be problematic. And in the next workshop, we'll talk extensively about this. But for now, I will say that one of the concerns about this type of work activity is that over time, it can lead to alienation, meaning that you become separated from what it is that you feel and what it is that you are expected to display to others. So this is essentially a feeling of inauthenticity. So let's take a look at what I mean by this on the next slide. So going back to this idea of feeling rules at work, the Starbucks barista is, I think, one of the better examples of this. When we think about service with a smile and what type of burden that might entail for someone when they're expected to do this for 8 hours over an extended period of time, one can easily come to feel emotionally exhausted or burnt out, especially in the case where we might be dealing with someone who's not being pleasant or is having a bad day and taking it out on you. And you still have to manage your own emotions in reaction to that to then give that service with a smile. So this is where the notion then of the barista's burden comes from. And in an MSNBC article published back in 2013, the author published a story about the emotional demands and toll of the barista. And I encourage you to read this news article yourself. But here I'm just going to go through a snippet with you. And I think it is the most powerful snippet from the article. It reads, "A Starbucks barista's job is more than just serving coffee. She also needs to be polite, even friendly to the customers. If she does her job correctly, then maybe the customer will walk away feeling like the barista was actually happy to serve him, and that it was not only her job, but a genuine pleasure. In many jobs, that sort of projected enthusiasm may just be a way of earning some additional tips." And so, in order to take this a bit further to understanding emotions at work and emotional labor, although I think this is a pretty good example, I'm also going to play a short clip of a podcast that is available online that you can listen to that really captures this idea of managing emotions at work.
You're listening to Marketplace. I'm Molly Wood, in for Kai Risdall. Now, when you are shopping in those places like the mall or some store that's trying to provide you with in-person service and care, you will encounter a lot of apparently cheerful sales reps running around to help you with your shopping or eating or browsing needs. But as Marketplace's Sabrine Benishore reports, some of them may be working harder than you think.
This job, Kara O'Regan's job, will probably sound pretty familiar to a lot of people.
We were encouraged to be positive and to put a positive spin on things whenever possible.
She worked in retail sales, and the customers were, not always very nice.
Their responses would be out of proportion to what was actually going on, taking their own stress and psychological distress out on us.
But she faked a positive attitude to do her job. And really, faking that attitude was her job.
always with a smile on your face, a lot of clapping involved, that sort of thing.
Clapping?
Clapping for the customers, clapping for our coworkers, any excuse to applaud anyone.
There's a word for this faking it. It's called emotional labor.
Emotional labor is a type of work where instead of like physical labor, where you're using your muscles to perform the work, you're using your emotions to perform the work.
That's Alicia Grandy, professor of industrial organizational psychology at Penn State University. Now, it may sound like emotional labor is just a fancy word for, all of life and every job ever, but Grandy says it's different.
It's an ongoing, constant expectation for 8 hours. It's the central aspect of what you're doing and whether you're doing it well.
And we do demand it as a society.
One of my coworkers was helping a customer.
This is Zach Hernandez. He's a barista.
Later, we found a posting on Yelp with this coworker's picture on it saying that he was coming across as unhappy, uncouth. They felt wronged by that.
Grandy's done research suggesting that faking happiness all day long is really emotionally taxing.
And that's been shown to create a lot of physical tension, which can then build up and create health issues. And over time, it can result in job burnout.
And she says the people asked to do this kind of work a lot of times are neither paid much nor respected.
Often, these kinds of workers get mistreated by customers, and they still have to maintain that smile. There's an uneven exchange.
I just remember being really angry all the time.
This is Kara Regan again, who worked in retail with the clapping and the smiley joy face all the time.
Being in traffic, I was angry. Standing on line at the bank, I was angry. Just angry all the time. I'm very stressed out, and I was having nightmares. I was not able to leave it at the door at all.
The stress literally was making her sick. Alicia Grandy.
Do we really need to have this, Mickey Mouse culture in America? Like this sense of like everything is like Disney, where everyone's on stage at all times? Like, do we really need that? Can we just be real with each other every once in a while?
Now, faking your way through your job doesn't always have to be awful if you believe in it. Like Ashforth is professor of management at Arizona State University.
I was talking to a dietitian, and she believes passionately in the importance of helping people lose weight. But sometimes her clients don't believe they're going to lose weight because it's hard to do. So she said, I've got to come across as very upbeat and positive, almost like a cheerleader.
Teachers who have to be patient with students, nurses who have to be positive for patients, for them, faking it is something to be proud of. The idea is that, yeah, you don't feel happy, but you believe that faking it is important and right.
If you get people who actually care about the job, and again, the job itself allows them to express themselves, there's autonomy involved in the role, and they have supportive management, a positive atmosphere, it can be a win-win.
Psychologists disagree about which is more important, the bright side or the dark side of emotional labor. But one thing they do agree on for employees and customers alike is showing the person on the other side some empathy. You never know the day someone's had. In New York, I'm Sabri Benashore for Marketplace.
For a much longer conversation.
Okay, so that was just a small snippet that I wanted to play for you guys to really give you a sense of what it is that we're talking about when it comes to emotional labor. And so you've heard a lot of the examples that I've been giving you are primarily from, frontline retail or customer service. But the reality of the situation is that emotional labor exists across a broad range of occupations. And there are also display rules, as we were talking about previously, that are in care work environments, right? So healthcare, as we can imagine, especially in the current context of COVID-19, is an area of work that is at its core an area of heightened emotions. And so we'll talk more about this in the next workshop because it has a unique connection to the ways in which we can think about the consequences of emotional labor. At that point, though, I will share with you some of my research and what I have found with regards to the consequences of emotional labor. But just briefly, when we think about emotional labor in care-based work settings, one of the ways we can think about expectations of nurses have to do with traditional sort of symbolic images of nurses as angels or healers and, natural caregivers, which also comes with a lot of gendered-based ideas, similar to, the flight attendant or the Starbucks barista. And there's these notions about, what a nurse looks like and how a nurse should deliver care. There's also the expectation and perhaps need to fulfill the idea that nurses are seen as someone who puts a patient at ease and actively then manage his or her own emotional state in order to manage the emotional state of a patient and put that patient first. This is particularly heightened in contexts where, a nurse may be working in palliative care or dealing with a grieving family while also, managing his or her emotions and feelings towards losing a patient. So I use these two contrasting examples to give you a sense of what emotional labor might look like across a broad range of occupations, and really how many occupations involve emotional labor as a requirement. And this brings me to the next slide. So based on the original definition of emotional labor as defined and conceptualized by Arlie Hochschild, she provided in her book a list of occupations that are considered to be high in emotional labor requirements. And these are, lawyers and judges, librarians, personal and labor relations registered nurses, therapists, dental hygienists, therapy assistants, clergymen and religious workers, social and recreational workers, college and university teachers, anything from, bank tellers, cashiers, clerical supervisors, bill collectors. So this is not a full exhaustive list of all of the occupations that require emotional labor. And we'll get a little bit more into the details of that next week. But just to give you a sense of what I mean by that emotional labor, it exists across a broad range of occupations. Okay, so finally, before I close this first workshop on the introduction to the concept of emotional labor and we move on, I want to emphasize that, emotional labor as it is originally defined is not housework or the emotions you manage and put into a relationship. It's not the emotional effort you expend or manage when dealing with family members or dealing with friends and anything related to your personal life. It is and has originally been defined as a form of labor in the context of work and wages. So the concept as it's been used for many different purposes and extended to many different contexts over the years. And so I do want to end this session to be very clear in setting the tone for its meaning as it was originally intended. And so I do encourage you to take a moment and read the article so I have a link to the article above on this slide. And it's an article from The Atlantic, which is it provides an overview of an interview with Arlie Hochschild, where she explains what the concept means and how it has been kind of taken out of context over the years. And it's a really interesting read, and I encourage you to read through that article. And so in the next session, as I mentioned, so that's 2 of 3, and then the 4th one will be a live Q&A that we are going to hold. But in the next session, we're really going to get into what is the process of emotional labor and what really happens internally and externally when an individual is engaging in emotional labor. And so that is something that we're going to discuss, and how that might lead to the consequences of emotional labor, and what are some of the strategies and ways that people use to manage their emotions in order to perform emotional labor. So that will be the topic of the next session. And I will be joined by Dr. Khayambashi then, who will also be talking to us about work stress. And so I hope that you guys all have a great week. I hope that you're doing well and staying well considering the circumstances that we're in, and take care, and best wishes to everybody. Thank you for being here and listening.